Truth Frequency Radio Network. KTFRN. Worldwide.
Hola, this is Sienna, inviting you to join me tonight as we navigate through the seen and the unseen, explore external and internal realities, expose on-world and off-world agendas, discover a path to joy and freedom. Now, join me as we illuminate the Shadowland and reclaim our birthright as free and sovereign beings. Good evening, everyone. This is Sienna, and you are at Truth Frequency Radio Network on Illuminating the Shadowland. And I am here with Mark Passio. The name of this interview is If Change is to Truly Be Created. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Sienna, thank you so much for inviting me today.
It's my honor. I want to tell everybody just a wee bit about you before we dive in. Mark has become a central spokesman for those of us serious about reclaiming our sovereignty and aligning with the natural law that governs all organic life here. His website, whatonearthishappening.com, is a culmination of many years of extensive research and investigation into the nature of our shared reality. It contains presentations, videos, podcasts, taking his guests on a journey of self-exploration, examining human consciousness, and the way it relates to the natural and universal problems which we currently are facing as a species. It is an absolutely extraordinary research library, and the topics that you do, Mark, are vast and very, very deep. So we can only, even in this two-part series, 2 hours, touch the very surface of the massive amount of information that you're bringing to the world, which I deeply thank you for. I am very interested in all of your natural law seminar. I know you have an 8-hour natural law seminar. But I was going to ask you the fairly superficial question to put us in the ballpark, because I know that natural law is central to everything that you're bringing us now. So, Mark, tell me about natural law. What is it, and how it contrasts with the law of man?
Sure. Well, essentially, this term natural has been hijacked in today's world. It's been turned into a word that is governed by mind control, unfortunately, when people associate it with ideas like Darwinian evolutionary theory. And I'm not using the word natural in that context whatsoever. I'm using it really in the scientific aspect of the word, meaning that it is something that is inherent to creation, that it has a basis in nature and reality, and it is not made or caused by any living beings. It is not something that is caused by human beings or any other three-dimensional being in the universe. It is existent, self-existent to the universe itself, and it wouldn't make a difference whether there were any sentient beings. This law would still apply. In other words, if there was no human beings, the laws of gravity and electromagnetism in the universe would still apply. They would still be there. The same could be said when it comes to natural law. It is something that exists inherently in creation. Now, that's the definition of natural. The definition of the term law is an existing condition that is binding and unchangeable, binding and immutable. That means it has an effect, whether anybody understands what is causing it or not. Okay, we are bound by it, and it is unchangeable by anything that we could possibly do. You know, we can counteract gravity for a time, but it is still in effect, and we are still ultimately bound by it. So it's unchanging. We are not going to do anything to take that law out of the existence of the universe, because we didn't create it, we didn't put it into effect. The laws of nature did. So That's the two basic definitions for the words natural and law. Now, if we put them together, the working definition for what the entire concept of natural law is universal, non-man-made, binding and immutable conditions that do something in our lives. And what these laws, this body of laws, actually does in our lives is it governs the consequences of what happens to us, the quality of our existences, okay, as a society, as a whole. It governs. And it does it on an individual level too, but certainly in the aspect I'm talking about, natural law, is that it governs the quality of the quality of our life experiences, because it acts as the governing dynamics of the consequences of our behavior. See, we have free will to choose the behaviors that we will enact toward others. Then natural law is working in effect. It is the deterministic component, whereas free will is the randomness component of creation. Natural law is the deterministic component. So in other words, there's boundary conditions, there's operating laws that exist that govern our free will choices. We have free will to act, but these are the dynamics that offer us, that give us actually absolutely unwaveringly, flawlessly, the result, the consequences of what we put into creation through our free will decisions and our behavior. So we have to look at it as it's a dynamic interchange, it's a dynamic interlink, okay? These two seemingly polarized opposite forces playing off against each other to create together the experience that we're undergoing. So we have free will, and we use that force, that randomness component, to choose the behaviors that we will enact. Then those behaviors are governed by natural law, which are laws of creation that govern the free will decisions that we make. And then we get a result on the other side. That result is directly determined by whether the behaviors that we chose were in alignment with morality or in opposition to morality. So one could say that natural law are simply moral laws that govern the dynamics of human consciousness. And I would say they govern the dynamics of the consciousness of any beings that have the capacity to understand those laws. So people will say, well, why does natural law apply to the animal kingdom? In other words, animals hunt and eat each other. They don't have the capacity to grasp the natural law consequences that are in effect. So natural law does not apply to animals. It applies to beings that have the capacity to understand the existence of these moral laws. In other words, you could say it governs the behavior of any beings that have the capacity to achieve morality in their lives. If that capacity exists to understand the difference between right and wrong behavior, to understand the difference between behaviors that do not cause harm to others and hence are rights versus behaviors that do cause harm to other beings and hence are wrongdoings, then natural law applies to the consciousness of those beings. So in a nutshell, that's essentially what natural law is. What does it mean to actually understand these laws of creation? Understanding them means that we have conscience. We truly have conscience born in our consciousness. And that means we definitively understand the objective difference between right behavior and wrong behavior. It's an objective standard of the quality of difference between two modes of behavior. Again, one mode causes harm, that's called wrong. One mode does not cause harm, and those actions are reserved by all beings as their rights to enact. So that's what it means to actually understand natural law. It means to understand the objective difference between right action and wrong action.
Okay, but
yes.
Mark.
Sure.
We're living in a world controlled by psychopaths.
Currently.
Okay? Currently. We are living in a world controlled by people that are violating these laws and seem, at least to this point, to be winning, to be the ones with the money, to be the ones who are gaining all within the world that they created. So, and a lot of people have modeled their reality and certainly their ego strivings towards those psychopaths, because as role models, they're the ones who seem to be the haves, where the rest of us are struggling incredibly. Right. So, what's going on?
Yes, this is a question that a lot of people ask when encountering this, because the current conditions that we're under lead people to believe that natural law does not exist, because the utterly ruthless people of this world seem to be coming out on top, in a sense that they have put themselves in a position where they essentially do whatever they want and get away with it, seemingly, as I said. See, we have to understand natural law applies to whole societies. So as the aggregate number of people in a given society are behaving in a moral capacity, the entire society becomes freer. And as the aggregate number of people in any given society behave less morally, okay, the whole society becomes more enslaved. This is the epitome of how natural law functions. I call this expression the law of freedom. Wow. As morality of a whole society increases in the aggregate, freedom increases. As morality declines in an entire society, freedom declines. So we could look at those tiny, less than 1% so-called elite, which I don't consider them the elite of anything. We could look at these absolute psychopathic lunatics that currently, quote, rule our society, and we look at the people who want to be like them, which is a considerable number of people. If they could exchange places with them in a heartbeat because they would have money and influence and seeming power, most people would do it. I mean, Now what does that say about our morality? That we would rather become like a psychopath than a moral being. It says that conscience really isn't born in most people. And most people don't want to hear that. They do not want to hear that. It's a very painful thing to hear just said outright like that. Are most human beings moral creatures? No, they are not. They don't have conscience born in them. Not to any true extent. They have a modicum of conscience, meaning in their everyday life, they may treat people without violence on a day-to-day basis. But that doesn't mean that they're truly, truly deep down inside people who deeply understand the difference between right and wrong. As a matter of fact, I just do a social experiment and ask people, can you define a right? And over 90% of people cannot even come close to the definition of what a right is at all. They cannot tell you that a right is an action, first of all. They'll come up with some philosophical mumbo-jumbo that really makes no sense, but they can't tell you that a right is based in action. It's an action that does not cause harm to other sentient beings, period. That's the actual definition of a right. And 99% of people probably could not just spit that definition out. So if we don't know what rights are, how could we say that we truly understand what the difference between right behavior and wrong behavior is? And that's why we're losing rights. Again, this is the dynamic that governs why we are losing our freedom. It answers the question. Natural law is the answer to the question. Why are we going deeper and deeper and deeper into bondage as a species? See, a lot of people see that that's happening, but they don't know the causal factor for why it's happening. They can't answer that question because this is the missing piece of the puzzle. And this is what the people who are actually controlling this society never want people to understand. I call natural law the most occulted knowledge on the face of the earth. It is what the occult controllers, the people who have a lot of knowledge about how human consciousness functions and how the laws of nature function, and rule over other people because they have that knowledge, and the whole masses of humanity are ignorant to that information and don't understand it. So that places this psychopathic, quote, elite, this tiny little psychopathic minority that's currently in control, it places them in a position of a power advantage over others. People say knowledge is power. Well, no, knowledge actively applied is power in the world. And since we can't apply that knowledge because we don't understand it, we haven't even looked into it at all. 99.9% of human beings have no idea what natural law is, have no idea that there's laws that govern what happens to a society based on its morality or immorality. And would not only have no idea that that law exists in nature, but would vehemently to the death fight that it doesn't exist. They are so attached to their illusion and complete absolute ignorance regarding these laws that they would insist it absolutely cannot exist. And I'll tell you the main reason for that. The main reason that so many people are attached these laws of nature, which exist and we are bound by, that they would insist that they do not exist, is because they want to believe that they can do whatever they want without consequence, and they want to believe that there is no higher power than man. Bottom line, there are the two bottom lines that come to that. Man's ego is so out of control, the ego mindset is so out of control that, one, we believe there are no consequences to our behaviors unless some other man or woman catches us, or a group of human beings catches us doing that wrong behavior and then physically does something to us. Okay, we want to believe that justice can only be created through a human being, and there's absolutely no consequences for our wrong behaviors if we can get away with them in the 3D world. That's one. And two, we want to believe we are God. For lack of a better term, doesn't make a difference what you think of that force of creation. Man wants to believe he is it. Okay? Men and women want to believe they are that force. That there's nothing that binds us higher than our own selves. In other words, we are the highest force of intelligence in all of creation, in the whole cosmos, and there is nothing that actually governs our behavior. See, I tell people, you think that natural laws govern the motions of every object in the cosmos, all the galaxies, the flow of energy within the galaxies, the stars, constellations, nebulae, okay? All of these things, the motion of planets, gravity on planets, oceans, ocean currents, geothermal energy, wind systems, weather systems. There's laws that govern every single one of those dynamics in creation and countless millions of other processes. Yet, there's no laws that govern behavior, that govern human behavior. Yeah, we're the only thing that is exempt. Human behavior is the only thing that is exempt in the whole universe from law. And I'm talking capital L law, not man's law. Now, to go back to your question, how this contrasts with man's law. Man's law is based in moral relativism. And we can see this immediately and readily. And most people are in cognitive dissonance about this. They think that because something is somehow written down by man's law, that magically makes it moral. And no, it does not, because there are many man's laws written that are immoral. You know, I ask people, how could I listen to rock music here in the United States? And if you listen to certain forms of music in Iran, for example, you could be jailed. I mean, you could play certain forms of music in a Muslim country and actually have your freedom taken because you played a certain kind of music. Yeah. And people will believe, well, that's their way of doing things and this is our way of doing things, and both are equally as valid because the people there agreed that an immoral behavior of taking someone's freedom of movement away because they played a certain kind of music can magically be a law and be right, quote unquote. Quote unquote, a right that man's laws, that man is allowed to pass into existence by writing it down. I mean, that's what moral relativism is. The idea that, hey, you could do this thing over here and it's moral, and you could do this thing over here and it's immoral. You know, how did prohibition go from being legal to then becoming, imbibing alcohol or making alcohol went from being legal in the United States, then to being illegal and punishable by jail sentences, then to being legal again? Well, what happened? It was a moral behavior at first that didn't cause harm to someone else. Then it magically became immoral, and just imbibing that substance or creating it became an immoral act, harming it then constituted harm to other people. And then at the time of the repeal of prohibition, it then went back to being a moral behavior. See, it's such utter nonsense when you even just think about it from a base level. Go right down to the brass tacks and just think about that. Can a behavior be moral, then immoral, then moral again? It's nonsense. All of man's laws are like that. They're all based on the whims and preferences of legislators at any given place or time. Therefore, that is the definition of moral relativism, the idea that there's no such thing as an objective right and wrong in nature, an objective standard of right and wrong that does not change based on human perception. Natural law has absolutely nothing to do with human perception. What human beings need to do, what our goal of our lives really should be, is to align our perceptions to natural law, to the objective differences between right and wrong. When we do that, then we could bring our behavioral decisions into alignment with those laws, and then we will not experience the negative consequences of living in opposition to those laws and breaking them. It's just like gravity. You have to bring it down to a very simple level. If you didn't know gravity, how it worked, and you thought that objects could just float after passing off of a ledge, for example, well, you might step over a ledge that's 50 feet tall and go splat. All right? But if you understand how gravity works through observation, of understanding how that natural law of motion is dynamically in effect in the world, and you see objects go over the ledge and go splat when they hit the rocky bottom, you wouldn't step over the edge and experience that negative consequence. Well, the same thing happens when we understand natural law. When we bring our behavior into alignment with it, we get a orderly set of results that does not involve self-inflicted suffering, like as if we would have stepped over that edge and experienced the negative result of not understanding gravity. And conversely, when we do break natural law and we choose immoral behaviors, especially in the aggregate as a society, the whole society experiences the negative consequences of living in opposition to these moral laws that are in effect, that weren't put into effect by humanity. And therefore we become more and more enslaved and experience more and more self-inflicted suffering. That's how natural law works. And to anybody that wants to insist these laws don't exist, aren't in operation, all I tell them is, you need to continue to live the way that you're living, insistent that there's nothing that governs your behavior until you suffer enough. When you continue to suffer and suffer and suffer endlessly and relentlessly, eventually your ego will break, and that's how it will have to be done. Unless you want to understand it on your own and look into it deeper, in a deeper way to understand what's happening to ourselves right now at this time in history, I tell people, willingly ignore it, and you'll find out by fire, by the way, what I call the way of maximum suffering and pain. And that will be your free will choice. But either way, you're going to learn it. Everyone present on this planet and on any other planet in the 3D universe will learn this law. And you will never escape this entire construct that we call the universe without learning it. That's one thing, you do not have free will choice. You have free will choice to ignore this reality, but you will experience the consequences of that. There is no such thing as ignoring reality without painful consequence. And it's not personal. That's the other thing. People will hear me saying this and they'll say, well, that sounds like the judgment of a vengeful God. No, it's absolutely the opposite. These laws are put here for our greatest evolutionary benefit and the most rapid uplift of consciousness. Because the creative force that put these laws into effect said, what's the best way I can help people to understand the proper modality for behavior that does not lead to suffering, to self-inflicted suffering? And that's to put boundary conditions in place that govern behavior, but it's a gentle governance of behavior, because we have free will to continue to break it and cause suffering for ourselves. It's like, do you have free will? Here's a great example. Do you have free will to put your hand in a boiling pot of water? Do you? Yes, you do. Absolutely you do. But what will happen? The skin will probably melt off the bone at some point. Okay? So you'll recognize, if you don't immediately shriek and jerk your hand out of the water because you're immediately getting second and third degree burns. Okay? But you see, that's going to teach you something, that chaotic result. It's going to teach you it's probably a good idea not to put your hand in a boiling pot of water. Well, see, we will understand that natural physical law much more readily because the consequences are immediate. Okay, but when it comes to the big idea of natural law regarding morality, moral law, which is the same as natural law, the laws of the consequence of behavior, it doesn't make a difference what you call it. Karmic law, moral law, God's law. I don't care. It's a name. Call it whatever you want. It's just a label. Okay? There are laws that govern what we do to other beings while we are alive. And, unfortunately, in the aggregate, as a society, it takes longer for the consequences of the individual wrong or oppositional behaviors when it comes to natural law to be added up and have an effect in society. So there's
Mark,
a time
we're
lag.
having to take a
Yes,
break now.
sure.
We'll be right back with Mark Passio. This is Illuminating the Shadowland on Truth Frequency Radio Network. Stay with us. Welcome back, everyone. This is Sienna Leia, and you are here on Illuminating the Shadowland. My guest this week is Mark Passio. Kind of cut you off there in mid-thought at the break, Mark. Sorry about that. I have a question.
Sure.
How? You talk in one of your talks about cosmic abandonment.
Yes.
And we talk a lot about the shadow on this show, and trying to understand the nature of human evil and the nature of our dissociation from reality and from being able to live in any kind of decent relationship with what you're talking about, with conscience, with integrity, with connection to life source. How did we get so traumatized and mind-controlled? You talk about in your Cosmic Abandonment way back at the beginning, and I'm talking Anunnaki times, that there were some very severe traumas that led us to be so dissociated from ourselves. And I'd like my listeners to understand some of this, because it seems unfathomable to us that we have no conscience, that we're taking on false realities and playing lip service to all of our religious beliefs and all of our fake morality, where at the core of it we seem to be so off track with any kind of decent, caring response to everything going on. How on earth could we be so clueless?
Well, that's a great question, and it involves a little bit of background information regarding, first of all, the human condition and the human psychological condition to understand the answer to that. But then it goes into a very deep, dark rabbit hole when it comes to an understanding of the horrific events that took place in the ancient past. And again, I don't claim to have total knowledge of that because it's very fragmented. And it's like when you have a jigsaw puzzle with 1,000 pieces, and maybe about, you only have half of those pieces. Well, you could put all of those pieces together if you were meticulous enough, and you might get a semi-accurate picture of what the whole jigsaw puzzle is going to look like when completed, even though you're missing those other pieces. So we don't have to have 100% of the information to have a decent picture of what happened here in the ancient past, but more and more information is slowly coming in, and a clearer picture is emerging. Let's start with what is the human condition in a word? If we had to define the human condition in one word, and there are many people who are in 100% total denial about this, but the human condition is slavery. We are held in a condition of slavery and duress, the constant threat of violence. Violence rules this world right now, unfortunately. And that's what I stand against. I stand against violent behavior. I stand against slavery in all of its forms. It doesn't make a difference whether it is physical, ball, chain, and shackle slavery, or whether it's mind control slavery, or financial slavery, or slavery of religious beliefs, holding people back from truth. Those are a different kind of chains. They're chains that exist in the mind. So I'm against all forms of slavery. Slavery you could just define as anything that holds you back in a position that you don't want to be in, and if you break out of that, there's some form of violence done to you, or you are threatened by violence. That's slavery. I don't care by any other name you want to call that, it's slavery indeed. So people are in denial that human beings are in slavery. Now, it's going to be very difficult to hear anything that comes after this if you are in denial that the human condition is slavery. Okay, I'm not asking anybody to believe that. I'm telling you it's a matter of absolute fact. And if you can't see it, you're under mind control, period. It's not my opinion that the human species is enslaved. It is the actual 100% matter-of-fact truth that we are an enslaved species right now. Okay? That doesn't mean that condition is legitimate, because I am no one's slave. But yet the condition I am held under is a condition of slavery. That's what I'm saying. I'm not legitimately anybody's slave. But am I held under the conditions of slavery? Yes, I am. Not spiritually, not mentally, but physically. Yes, I'm still held under that condition, unfortunately. I'm spiritually out of bondage. I'm mentally out of bondage. But there's one thing left to take out of bondage, and that's the physical body. And that can and is going to be done on this earth. That is not something to be looked at for some hereafter or some afterlife that may or may not come. We are here on the earth to end the condition of human slavery in the 3D physical planet, on the 3D physical planet Earth. Not somewhere else. Right here, right now. And that is the mission of all the spiritual warriors that have come to this earth at this time. And horribly, the vast majority of the people who incarnated to perform that mission of ending this slavery system got wildly dissuaded and taken off of their mission. They got wildly sidetracked. And they are no longer acting in that capacity, unfortunately, because they bought a bunch of nonsense of organized religion and the New Cage ideology, the New Age movement. So, it's very unfortunate that a lot of our spiritual warrior brothers and sisters have gotten taken off their mission, but maybe we can get them around to understanding the truth about what they really came here to do, which was to jailbreak a species out of a self-imposed prison that they were originally put into that prison forcefully, but now we're maintaining it all by ourselves. So to go back to the nature of your question, we have to look at the human condition of slavery and be honest about it first and foremost. Now, we have to look at the psychological underlying conditions that have led to the continuance of that condition of slavery. Okay? Not to put it into effect. Then we can understand, well, if this is the condition that maintains it, what put that mindset into effect? Because slavery can only be maintained in effect in the world if the mental condition of most of the people of that society are conducive to being held as slaves, to being in a mental condition that is conducive to slavery. Okay? So what is the human psychological condition? Well, if you look at what maintains most of all the slavery condition on earth, I think we would be in universal agreement if you went to the people who do understand that we are in slavery and you ask them, what is the mindset that continues to allow slavery to exist? Almost universally, the answer is going to come back from conscious people: ignorance. And not just any kind of ignorance, willful ignorance. Meaning, is the information that we need to know to free ourselves present on the earth right now? Yes, it is. It's not hidden anymore. It's out. It's all out there. Okay? The floodgates have opened. The internet exists. All this information is out in the open. What are we doing with it as a species in the aggregate? Hardly anything. I'm not trying to put everybody down. A lot of people are doing something with it, and very, very, very dedicated work, I might add. Good, dedicated work. When it comes to the whole species, what are we doing with all that information? Nothing. Hardly anything. In other words, it amounts to something that is paltry. It is almost negligible when it comes to the whole population. Okay?
Yeah.
Sadly. And I'm not saying that to discourage anybody from doing this work. I think it's the most important work there is to do, and we need to develop more willpower to do it, to speak the truth to others. But I'm trying to be honest about the current dynamic. See, I don't want to tell people what they want to hear. Too many people want to do that because they want to be liked. They want to be popular. I don't want to be liked or popular. I want to tell people the truth as I see it about where we're really at and where we're going if we don't change. Okay? So when I say we're doing this in a paltry amount, that's the dynamic as I have measured it as accurately as I can when I perceive what's going on. When I turn my attention to what's going on in the world, I say to myself, there's not enough people teaching truth at all. Not even close. We're not even near that number. So the willful ignorance of the essentially mindless herd of humanity continues unabated because there's not enough people speaking truth to them. And they don't look at it as their work to do. So that willful ignorance, people would say, well, hey, that's the cause of the condition. And I'll say, it's one of the causes, but it's not the root cause. It is probably the highest level manifesting cause, okay, that's out there that leads to the current condition, but it's not the most base, fundamental root cause. See, we have to go beneath the willful ignorance of the masses and say, well, why are they willfully ignorant? What happened to them to make them willfully ignorant? Or what is another? Is there another psychological condition that underlies their willful ignorance? And yes, there is. Well, you would say, well, why would someone not want to know something when the absence of that knowledge will lead to continued suffering? And taking on board that knowledge would lead to the alleviation of that suffering. It sounds like madness at first. Well, they'd have to be crazy, right? Well, no, they don't necessarily have to be fully insane. It is a form of insanity. But why does anybody not want to know something? When you start telling somebody something, even if it's bad, even if it's like true, and it's about what's going on in the world, and it's about it's a very bad condition, a lot of people will say, oh, don't tell me that, I don't want to know. Well, what are they really saying? We all hear this, right? What are they really saying? They're really saying, I don't want to be responsible for having to do something about that. That's what they're really saying. So if I am not going to be responsible for doing something about that, don't even bother to give me that information. Because see, then the information will weigh on them and it will create a guilt. They'll say, well, I know this, yet this is still going on. What am I doing to try to change that? So what really people are saying when they say, I want to remain willfully ignorant, is they're saying, I want to remain personally irresponsible. The refusal to accept personal responsibility. Even if, I accept personal responsibility for what's going on in the world. That means my ability to respond to it is my own. It doesn't mean I caused it, I did it. Okay? That's not the kind of responsibility we're talking about. In other words, if I see a child being abused, right? Do I have a ability to respond, which is what responsibility is, to that scenario or situation? Yes, I do. And if I don't respond, I'm shirking my ability to respond, my personal responsibility. So while I didn't create the human condition of slavery, do I have a responsibility to attempt to change it in whatever way I can, in the most effective way I can? Yes, I do. And I am going to assume that responsibility. I am going to claim it. I am going to own it. I'm going to act upon it. That's what people don't want to do. They believe erroneously that they can somehow abdicate that personal responsibility and say someone else is responsible for that, not me. I have no ability to respond to that scenario, but other people may, if they want to. What you're doing is you're claiming a falsity, that you have no ability to do something to change that scenario. And guess what? This is where most people are at. Even the people who can see what's going on now, they're saying, I can't do anything about that. No, the answer is you won't do anything about it. Will. See, again, willful ignorance, willful refusal to own your personal responsibility. And many people don't want to hear it like that. But I'm telling you, that's exactly how it is. Okay, and the faster more people understand that this is the dynamic that's going on psychologically in the human subconscious, the faster we're going to effect a solution to this problem, because we will start dealing head on in a confrontative way with the underlying psychological causal factors that lead to slavery, that lead to the perpetuation of slavery. So now, is that refusal to own personal responsibility the bottom of the barrel? Is that the baseline that it comes down to? No. What leads to that? So we have to ask another question. Why would anyone not want to have the ability to respond to something that's wrong that's going on around them? In other words, what I'm asking is, why would anyone want a condition that's harmful and bad for them and leads to slavery for themselves to continue? Think about that. Why would anybody want a condition of slavery for themselves to continue? Or even just suffering, self-inflicted suffering? So in other words, let's look at this, right? We could give an example.
Yeah.
The bad food in our diet. How many people are just continuing to eat junk and don't want to eat very high nutrient density organic foods that don't have a lot of chemicals, pesticides, additives, etc. in them? Okay? For whatever justifications or excuses they want to make. I see people in the so-called truth and freedom movement with horrific diets. Absolutely horrific diets. Diets like I would have eaten 15, 20 years ago, okay? And my diet was one of the worst you could ever possibly imagine until I started understanding what was going on with our food. And then I radically changed it, and I am in 100% health right now. So, why would anybody want to do that and stay willfully ignorant, not learn about everything that's in our food, then adjust their behavior by taking personal responsibility to adjust their behavior accordingly with that knowledge? Well, something has to be present psychologically for that to be the condition, their mental condition. And the answer to that is at some level, not even at a conscious level, but at some level, they cannot be in a state of self-love. Now, as harsh as that sounds, people will be like, oh my God, how all these things you're saying about humanity, all right? So you're saying humanity is a self-hating species. Most people are self-loathing. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because if they did have true self-love, they would take knowledge in that about what's going on that's bad for us, and then they would adjust their behavior accordingly to do whatever they can not to engage in that harm to themselves or anybody else. So it's like, why does a drug addict continue to take drugs when we all should know, pharmaceutical drugs and other street drugs, with very few exceptions. I don't have a problem with cannabis per se, but, heroin's probably not a very good thing for the human body and mind, nor is cocaine or cocaine derivatives, etc. Okay? So what I'm saying is, why would anybody continue to pollute their body with hardcore drugs that only damage the body and mind? Well, because they're not necessarily in a state of ignorance. They know what's wrong with these substances, but they are in a state of willful ignorance. They know it, and yet they're going to ignore it anyway. And they're not using their personal responsibility to build themselves up and make themselves stronger and better and less polluted. Okay? So they're refusing to own their personal responsibility to care for their vessel, the human body. That can't be the case if they're not self-loathing at some level, whether it be at a conscious level where they're, consciously saying, "Oh, I'm ashamed of myself," or "I hate myself," or "I think I'm a horrible person." But most people don't have self-loathing at a conscious level like that. There are some who are so deep into the willful ignorance and refusal to own personal responsibility that they hate themselves on a conscious level. That's the state of consciousness known as shame. And there's nothing below that except death. That's the lowest level of consciousness that there is shame-based consciousness. Thinking of yourself as, something that is completely unworthy. But the self-loathing I'm talking about, the self-loathing and lack of self-respect and self-esteem issues I'm talking about are largely subconscious. They're there. People are doing these things, don't even know why they're harming themselves, don't even know why they don't care that they're enslaved, don't even know why they don't want to take any responsibility to do anything about it. It's all in the subconscious mind, these issues of self-loathing. So then the magic question becomes, what put these psychological conditions in place? Is there a root causal psychological factor that started making us act as a self-loathing people? Or even on an individual level, what makes that person act as self-loathing? Why don't people have enough self-respect to stand up for themselves, want better things for themselves, want better conditions for themselves, want to be freer, want to be more knowledgeable, want to be more responsible? What makes that condition present? What puts that condition there? And I'm going to give people the root psychological causal factor, and it's going to sound strange, okay? Because many people have not looked at psychology at this level before. They've not looked at what leads to other conditions, and you trace it back, and you trace it back, and you trace it back. You go from this psychological condition, you say, well, what was the cause? What led to that? Like we've just done here. Willful ignorance in society. Well, what was the cause? People don't want to own personal responsibility because with knowledge comes responsibility. So they want to remain ignorant. Well, then why don't they want to be personally responsible for their own situation? And that's because they don't love themselves enough. They have self-loathing issues. Well, then we finally ask the question, why is our species as a whole, in the aggregate, most people, why are they self-loathing? Why don't they really love themselves? And there's a reason, there's an answer. And it is the psychological condition of having deeply embedded, most of the time subconsciously embedded, parental abandonment issues. Parental abandonment issues is the root psychological cause of the human condition of allowing slavery to continue unabated and unchecked. Now, if we look at psychological abandonment issues, okay, what we're seeing is a child somehow missing, okay, involvement of a parental figure. And it does not have to be physical. Again, the parent does not have to be physically gone from the presence of the child for the child to undergo abandonment issues, parental abandonment issues, psychologically, okay? If the parent wasn't there for the child's mental needs, their needs regarding emotions, their needs regarding conscience, the development of morality, if the parent wasn't there at a level of being able to go to them as a support figure, being there in the child's life, supporting what that child is doing in a nurturing capacity, okay, if they were emotionally unavailable, these are all root causes of parental abandonment issues. So when we're looking at this issue as the root cause, we have to understand there's many different facets to it. It's mental abandonment. It's psychological abandonment, moral abandonment, spiritual abandonment. If the parent offered absolutely no spiritual guidance in the child's life, that is a form of abandonment. And then, of course, there's physical abandonment through divorce, for many different reasons, or just the mother or father not wanting to be present because they don't want the responsibility of the child that they bore into the world. We see physical, actual abandonment of leaving children someplace, or adoption, etc. And you also have death, whether from natural or man-made causes. Sometimes people's parents pass away when they're young ages, when they're children too. So, all of these things lead to some form of abandonment issue, and that's traumatic. Now, when something's very traumatic, something happens in the mind. The conscious mind doesn't want to relive that trauma, because then, through visualization and imagination, if you relive trauma, your body undergoes the same traumatic responses physiologically as when the trauma first occurred. And that's a stress reaction. It's a fight-flight reaction. The body doesn't want to do that because you're putting harm on the body, on the internal organs and the brain. So what the body has, and the central nervous system has, is a defense mechanism to take the conscious trauma and nest it and bury it, in the subconscious mind, which you could look at as a big, huge, dark vault where all the painful stuff gets stored and locked up tight so that it can't emerge up to the conscious level of awareness, and then we start reliving it. See, this reliving is only what happens when we react to the trauma. If we bring it up consciously to the surface, we can work with that shadow material, and that takes effort, that takes knowledge on how to do that. It takes practice on how to do that effectively without harming yourself. Very deep introspective techniques have to be used, often combined with ancillary techniques for dealing with those traumas. We don't have time to get into all of that on this show, but those techniques are all out there. EFT is one of them. Meditation. And then under that you have, at the root, you could say self-loathing.
Hang on.
The trunk of the tree. Yes.
Mark,
Sure.
We lost you there, but that's okay. Perhaps we still got it on your recorder.
Yes, it was effectively recorded. Do we need to take a break now?
We have a minute and a half to the end of the show.
Okay.
So we may have to pick this up on hour 2, which is next Friday night.
Sure.
I think this is just hugely important information. It is where we get train wrecked and where we have this knee-jerk response to not facing the crisis that we're in or the urgent issues of care that are all around us. And I appreciate so much your wisdom and your understanding and your passion. This is what the world needs now so much. Tell people how to get hold of you, and we will pick this up, everyone, next week at 9 o'clock on Friday night.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. My main website is whatonearthishappening.com. whatonearthishappening.com. And I always suggest to people, if you're going to delve into the information that I cover, the best place to start is my podcasts, my audio podcast series. Go to the podcast section on my site and listen forward in order from number 1 and move forward in order without skipping around at your own pace. If you do that, you'll get the most value out of the audio series on my website. There's also lots of videos up there. I think I have about 18 or 20 videos up on my website. You could check that out in the video section as well. whatonearthishappening.com. And Sienna, I want to thank you so much for inviting me onto the show. Looking forward to picking it up on the next show.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.